Fears are once again bubbling up over the health of the European debt market. Investors have been zeroing in on Espírito Santo Internacional. This is Portugal's largest publicly traded bank. On Tuesday, it said that it had missed payments on some of its debt. And our next guest says nothing that brought us into the European debt crisis has been fixed. For more, we are turning to Alex Yurchevsky. He's the managing partner with Recovery Partners. Alex, good to have you with us today. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you very much for having me.
Let's talk a little bit about this, because we've got different views here. I just interviewed somebody who said this is almost a one-off, that it's a company-specific story, that this was set off because this bank in particular has internal investments that are going back and forth that they have to figure out themselves, that it's not something of more to come. What do you say in response to that?
Well, I think this is symptomatic of what's going on in Europe. Yeah, sure, it's a one-off. It applies to this particular bank. But the question is, how many other banks like that are there in Europe? And it harks back 5 years ago when we started with the crisis in Europe. The patches that were applied were macro patches. Mm-hmm. What we were recommending at the time, and for that matter goes for what's going on in the U.S., is a controlled due diligence of all the important institutions in Europe and in the U.S. That never happened. What the authorities opted for was grand schemes, put in a lot of liquidity, force rates down so that institutions could better carry their debt and countries could better carry their debt, force a lot of liquidity in the system so that there was ample cash around to buy up all these bonds and get those yields down to where they are today. But what it ignored was the fact that there were some systemic issues, some problems in all of these banks that were very specific and could lead to situations like this. This situation is not a surprise. A few weeks ago, KPMG came out with an audit of this particular bank, signaling that there were some problems. This bank is a holding type structure of which there are hundreds in Europe, and it's very difficult to disentangle the intercompany liabilities of these organizations, and that's what tripped things up here. To say that this is just a small problem affecting one bank, I think is extremely short-sighted. This is a symptom of what's ailing the entire system in Europe.
Alex, that is interesting in the sense that these are holding companies, and as you say, there's hundreds like that of this type in Europe.
Yeah.
So they're intertangled. Do you liken that to what we saw in the U.S. financial crisis, where there was just so much counterparty risk? Is this a similar type of scenario?
But it's intra-counterparty because you've got obligations going both ways inside the organization. So one part of the organization owes money to another part of the organization, they got tripped up. One of the ways in which the ECB was able to expand credit, and one of the things that Draghi's not telling you about his big bazooka, he's promising everybody towers of gold, but he's not saying that what this is built on is a foundation of sand. Wind the clock back to 2010 and look at the ECB repo book. There was eligible collateral consisted of only obligations that were single A plus rated or above.
Okay.
If anybody wants the old repo book, we can give it to them. That repo book is out the window. In order to get yields in Europe down to where they are now and to flood the system with liquidity, they had to loosen up on all the credit standards of these repo transactions.
They lowered the
credit quality, so everybody is sitting on time bombs in Europe now. Everybody is sitting on a lowered book of paper when you look at these collateralized transactions.
So, Alex, then for us and our viewers, let's walk this out. What does this look like a year from now? What can we expect to see next?
Well, I think this is, again, I say this is symptomatic. We may not see a huge crash right away, but I think the conditions, the seeds of another huge crisis have been sown by the very policies that we were told that the markets have been led to believe would lead them out of danger. The markets in Europe are in perilous condition. Here in the U.S., it's no different. I don't think QE has solved anything. It certainly wasn't set up to grow the economy. It was set up to bail out the Treasury in terms of its funding requirements and bail out the banking system. Whether or not they've succeeded is questionable, and it comes down to the same thing. Mm-hmm. Credit quality. Has credit quality improved? In fact, it has deteriorated. If we wind the clock back again 3-4 years,
right,
when they were setting up those rescue funds in Europe, the ESM and the SFF, they were talking about the total bank credit problem in Europe as being about 110 billion in size. Mm-hmm. That was the number. And, a 500 billion ESM fund is going to cover that handily, and then we can cover that and cover it. Well, those funds are out the window. And a few months ago, the IMF actually came up with a much more accurate number, for the bank credit problem in Europe, and that number is 1.3 trillion.
Right.
Oh, wow.
Right.
It's a lot bigger than we thought.
Alex, we have to leave it there. Great to have your insight, and definitely hope to have you back for much more. Thank you.
Okay, great.
That was Alex Yurchevsky, Managing Partner with Recovery Partners.